The morning Victoria Hargrove walked into Merit's diner on Caldwell Street. She was already running late and already annoyed. She spotted the line cook first, a quiet man in a stained apron standing at the pass with his hands folded. Then she spotted the small stuffed rabbit sitting in the corner booth, one ear missing, one glass eye catching the fluorescent light. She turned to her regional manager and said, loud enough for the whole floor to hear, "Is that a child's toy or a health code violation?" He did not know that the man in the apron had once developed proprietary flavor systems for 3 Michelin-recognized kitchens before grief, and a 6-year-old girl quietly changed every plan he had ever made. The camera in the corner was still recording. Marcus Hale had been cooking since before he knew what cooking meant. He grew up in a narrow house in the east part of the city, the kind of house where the kitchen was the only warm room in winter, and his grandmother moved through it with the unhurried authority of someone who had never once consulted a recipe card in her life. He watched her the way children watch things they do not yet have words for, closely, quietly, storing everything. By the time he was 17, he had a part-time job at a Portuguese restaurant 2 bus rides from home. By 22, he had completed a formal culinary program on a partial scholarship and was working prep at a hotel kitchen that took its sourcing seriously. He was not loud about any of it. That was simply how he was made. The years that followed were the kind that look, from the outside, like a steady climb. He moved through 3 kitchens in 8 years, each one more demanding than the last, each one teaching him something the previous one could not. He developed a particular gift for sauces, not the theatrical reductions that photograph well, but the foundational ones, the kind that hold a dish together without announcing themselves. His colleagues noticed, his supervisors noticed. He did not particularly care whether they noticed or not. He was interested in the work. Claire came into his life during a catering event at a gallery opening. She was standing near the appetizer station with a glass of white wine, reading the ingredient cards with what he later described as genuine curiosity rather than performance. They talked for 40 minutes. He forgot to restock the shrimp. His sous chef covered for him without being asked. That was 11 years before the morning at Merit's diner. They married quietly. Lily arrived 2 years later, small and loud and immediately opinionated about everything. Claire called her a force of nature. Marcus called her his best work. For 3 years, the 4 of them, Marcus, Claire, Lily, and a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Buttons that Lily had selected from a hospital gift shop at age 2 and never once relinquished, occupied a life that felt, by every honest measure, complete. Then Claire got sick. The details are not the point. The point is that it was fast and it was not fast enough. And when it was over, Marcus was standing in a kitchen that no longer felt like his, holding a 3-year-old who kept asking when Mama was coming back from the doctor. He did not have an answer. He gave her Mr. Buttons instead. She held the rabbit and he held her, and they stayed like that for a long time. He could have kept climbing. His reputation was intact. 2 former colleagues had already reached out about positions. But the positions meant long hours and unpredictable travel and a child in full-time care with a father she would see mostly on weekends. And Marcus looked at that future very carefully and set it aside. He took a line cook position at Merit's Diner on Caldwell Street, a mid-tier chain with 40 locations at the time, unremarkable in almost every respect. The pay was a fraction of what he had earned before. The kitchen was smaller. The expectations were lower. He accepted all of it without complaint, because the shift ended at 3:15 and the school pickup was at 3:40, and Lily would be standing at the gate with Mr. Buttons tucked under one arm, looking for him. He did not know that the sauce he would quietly develop in that unremarkable kitchen would eventually be served in over 200 locations across 4 states. He had been at Merit's for nearly a year when the regional manager, a man named Dale Pruitt, first took notice of him. Not in the way a supervisor notices good work, in the way a certain kind of person notices someone who makes them feel, by comparison, insufficient. Pruitt was the kind of man who had arrived at his position through a combination of corporate timing and aggressive self-promotion. And he had very little patience for people who were competent without being deferential about it. Marcus was not rude. He was simply self-contained in a way that Pruitt found difficult to read and therefore difficult to manage. The sauce had started as a practical solution. The chain's existing house sauce was thin and inconsistent. Different batches tasted different depending on who was making it, and the complaints from the floor were steady and low grade. The kind that never quite reach a threshold, but never quite go away either. Marcus adjusted the ratio one Tuesday afternoon without asking anyone's permission. He added a smoked paprika blend he had been testing at home, adjusted the acid balance, and changed the resting time. The next day, a regular customer asked the server what was different. The server didn't know. The customer came back the following week and asked again. Within 3 months, the sauce had become, quietly and without any announcement, the thing people mentioned when they talked about Merit's Diner. Marcus wrote down the formula on a lined index card in his own shorthand, a notation system he had developed during his hotel kitchen years, compact and precise and legible only to someone who already knew the underlying logic. He kept the card in his locker. He told no one about it. He was not secretive by nature. He simply did not think it required explanation. He did not know that Dale Pruitt had already begun documenting a file. The file was thin at first. A note about a missed temperature log. One entry, one morning, during a period when Marcus had been covering 2 stations because a colleague called in sick. A note about a verbal exchange that had not, by any witness account, been an exchange at all, but rather Marcus answering a question in a tone Pruitt found insufficiently warm. The file grew slowly, the way certain kinds of damage grow, not through any single event, but through accumulation, through the patient layering of small distortions until the shape of the thing no longer resembles what it started as. Victoria Hargrove had acquired Merit's Diner chain 18 months earlier as part of a broader portfolio expansion. She was 44, the daughter of a commercial real estate developer, and she had a particular talent for identifying underperforming hospitality assets and restructuring them quickly. She was not a restaurateur by training. She was an operator. The distinction mattered to her, and she made it often in interviews. She had taken Merit's from 40 locations to 96 in under 2 years, and she was projecting 200 by the end of the following fiscal year. She moved fast. She trusted her regional managers to handle the floor-level details. She did not, as a general practice, read full personnel files before signing termination orders. Pruitt submitted the fabricated safety violation report on a Wednesday. It cited a temperature log discrepancy, a storage protocol failure, and a vague reference to a pattern of non-compliance. The health inspector who had visited the previous Friday had found nothing actionable, a fact that appeared nowhere in Pruitt's summary. Victoria signed the termination order the following morning. She had a board call at 9 and a site visit in the afternoon, and the file was one of 11 items in her inbox. She initialed the bottom of the page without reading past the first paragraph. Marcus received the termination notice on a Thursday. Lily was in the corner booth with Mr. Buttons, doing a worksheet from school, waiting for the shift to end. Victoria Hargrove arrived 20 minutes later for what was meant to be a routine site visit, and it was during that visit that she made the remark about the toy in the booth. Loud, dismissive, the kind of comment that is not quite directed at anyone but is clearly meant to be heard by everyone. Marcus removed his apron. He folded it with the same unhurried care he brought to everything. He walked to the corner booth, took Lily's hand, gathered her worksheet and her pencil and Mr. Buttons, and walked out through the front door without a word. The camera in the corner recorded all of it. He did not know, walking out into the afternoon light with his daughter's hand in his, that the sauce he had left behind was already the load-bearing wall of a structure that was about to fail. He was quiet on the drive home. Lily asked if they were getting ice cream. He said yes. The complaints started arriving on a Friday, which was the worst possible day for them to start. Fridays at Merit's were high volume, the kind of shift where every ticket matters and every table turns twice. And the servers at the Caldwell Street location noticed the problem first, the way front-of-house staff always notice things before anyone in an office does. The sauce tasted different. Not dramatically different. Not wrong in any obvious nameable way, just off in the manner of something that has been approximated rather than reproduced. By Saturday, the complaints had spread to 3 other locations. By Monday, there were 11. By the end of the first full week without Marcus Hale in the kitchen, the corporate complaint tracking system, a dashboard that Victoria Hargrove's operations team monitored with the kind of attention usually reserved for financial instruments, had logged responses from 47 separate locations across 2 states, all of them citing some version of the same thing. The sauce was different. Something was missing. The corporate kitchen team was assembled on Tuesday of the second week. There were 4 of them, trained professionals, each with credentials that would have looked impressive on any resume. And they were given the chain's official sauce formula, the one that existed in the franchise documentation, the one that had been standardized and approved and filed in triplicate. They made it exactly as written. They tasted it. They looked at each other. They made it again. The result was the same both times, technically correct, functionally adequate, and entirely without the quality that had been drawing customers back to Merit's for the better part of 3 years. He did not know that the formula in the franchise documentation had never been his formula. It had been an approximation, assembled by a corporate standardization team that had watched his process from a distance and written down what they could observe, missing the ratios they could not measure by eye and the resting time he had never mentioned to anyone. The document looked authoritative. It had version numbers and approval signatures and a date stamp. It was, in every structural sense, a record. It was simply not accurate. Darnell Webb had worked alongside Marcus at the hotel kitchen 8 years earlier, during a period when both of them were doing the kind of foundational work that doesn't make anyone famous, but makes everything else possible. Darnell was a careful man, methodical in the way that people who have been burned by imprecision tend to be methodical, and he had kept, in a series of spiral-bound notebooks, detailed logs of every significant development that had come out of that kitchen during his tenure. He had done it for his own reasons, the way certain craftsmen document their work not for any audience, but because the act of writing it down is part of how they think. He had heard about Marcus's termination through a former colleague. He had not reached out immediately because Darnell was not a man who acted on incomplete information. He waited. He read what was being reported. He pulled out the notebooks and found the entries from the period when Marcus had first been developing the foundational sauce logic that would later, in a different kitchen and a different context, become the thing Merit's customers were now calling the chain's best feature. The entries were dated. They were specific. They included Marcus's name, his notation system, and the underlying logic of the flavor architecture he had been working through at the time. Darnell looked at the dates for a long time, then he made a phone call. Meanwhile, at the corporate level, the response to the quality collapse was being managed with the particular kind of confidence that comes from not yet understanding the full scope of the problem. Victoria Hargrove issued a statement through her communications team describing the situation as a temporary supply chain adjustment and assuring franchise partners that the formula would be stabilized within the week. The statement was professionally worded. It was also, in a technical sense, a guess. The franchise partners were not reassured. These were not passive investors, they were operators. People who had put their own capital into locations and who watched their daily numbers with the attentiveness of people for whom the numbers were personal. They had been watching the customer feedback data in real time. They knew what the corporate statement did not acknowledge, that the complaints were not about supply chain. The complaints were about taste. And taste, in a diner context, is not a supply chain problem. It is a people problem. Quiet phone calls began, not to the corporate office. Those calls had already been made and had produced the statement, which had satisfied no one. These were calls between franchise partners, the kind of lateral communication that happens when a vertical structure has stopped providing useful information. Names were mentioned. Marcus Hale's name was mentioned. Someone had eaten at the Caldwell Street location regularly and had noticed, in the weeks before the termination, that the sauce had been consistently excellent. Someone else had a contact at a competing chain who had tried to recruit Marcus 2 years earlier and had been told he wasn't available. The picture being assembled in these conversations was not flattering to the corporate narrative. Lily had started second grade. She carried Mr. Buttons in her backpack now rather than her arms. A concession to the social logistics of being 7, though she still took him out at the kitchen table every afternoon while Marcus made her a snack. She had asked him once why they weren't going to the diner anymore. He had said they were taking a break. She had accepted this with the equanimity of a child who has learned early that some questions don't have answers that help. Marcus was not idle. He had taken a part-time position at a small catering operation run by a former colleague, the kind of work that doesn't require a title and doesn't offer one, but keeps a person in a kitchen and keeps the bills manageable. He did not discuss merits. He did not read the franchise complaint reports that were beginning to circulate in industry newsletters. He made Lily's lunches and picked her up at 3:40 and helped her with her worksheet at the kitchen table and let Mr. Buttons sit on the counter while he cooked dinner. He did not know that Darnell Webb had already made contact with a food industry attorney named Patricia Osei, and that Patricia Osei had looked at Darnell's notebooks and said, quietly and without drama, that the dates were going to matter very much. Victoria Hargrove held a press conference on day 11. She stood at a podium with the Merit's logo behind her and described the chain's commitment to quality and its proven systems and its confidence in its corporate kitchen team. She used the word standardized 4 times. She did not mention Marcus Hale. She did not know, standing at that podium, that the thing she was describing as a system had in fact been a person, and that the person was currently helping his daughter glue macaroni to a piece of construction paper at a kitchen table on the east side of the city. The franchise partners watched the press conference. Several of them made notes. The phone calls continued. Something was coming. It had not arrived yet, but the shape of it was already visible to anyone paying close enough attention. The locker had been sitting untouched for 11 days when the Caldwell Street location manager, a woman named Rosa Fuentes, finally got around to clearing it out. Rosa had been at Merit's for 6 years. She had worked alongside Marcus for most of that time, and she had a practical, unsentimental relationship with the facts of the situation. He was gone, the locker needed to be cleared, and the contents would be boxed and held for 30 days per company policy before being discarded. She found the usual things first: a spare set of shoe covers, a folded rain jacket, a photograph of Lily, age 5, sitting on a kitchen counter with Mr. Buttons in her lap, and a look of complete satisfaction on her face. Rosa set the photograph aside carefully. Then she found the index card. It was tucked into the inside pocket of the rain jacket, folded once, lined paper, the kind from a standard notepad. The writing was small and dense, a system of abbreviations and ratios and timing notations that did not, at first glance, look like a recipe. It looked like a cipher. Rosa turned it over. On the back, in a different ink but the same hand, was a date. The date was 3 years and 4 months before the current franchise documentation had been filed. She did not know what she was looking at, but she knew it was not nothing. Rosa called Darnell Webb because Darnell's name had come up twice in the franchise conversations she had been peripherally aware of, and because she trusted her instincts about people, and her instinct said Darnell was the right person to call. She photographed the card on her phone before anything else. Then she drove it to him herself. Darnell looked at the card for a long time without speaking. He had seen Marcus's notation system before, had watched it develop in fact during those hotel kitchen years, had asked about it once and received a patient explanation of the underlying logic. He understood it the way you understand a language you have studied rather than grown up speaking, carefully, with effort, but accurately. He worked through the card line by line. It took him 40 minutes. When he was done, he sat back and said nothing for a moment. Then he said simply that it was all there, every ratio, every timing interval. The smoked paprika blend specified by weight and source. The acid adjustment noted in 2 stages. The resting protocol. All of it in Marcos's hand on a card dated 3 years and 4 months before the franchise documentation existed. He did not know that Patricia Osei had already been building a timeline and that the card was the last piece she had been waiting for. Patricia Osei had been practicing food industry law for 14 years. She was not a dramatic person. She did not make speeches or issue proclamations. She worked methodically, the way people work when they have learned that thoroughness is more durable than urgency. She had reviewed Darnell's notebooks. She had reviewed the franchise documentation. She had requested, through proper channels, the original standardization records from the corporate kitchen team. Those records had arrived in a format that was, she noted in her case file, conspicuously incomplete. Version histories truncated, contributor fields blank, the kind of document that has been tidied rather than simply filed. The index card changed the geometry of everything she had been building. She photographed it under controlled lighting. She documented the paper stock, the ink type, the fold pattern. She submitted it to a forensic document examiner, a retired federal analyst named Howard Gill, who now consulted privately, and asked him to verify the age of the ink and the paper relative to the stated date. Howard Gill was thorough and unhurried, and he had, over the course of his career, developed a very low tolerance for documents that claimed to be what they were not. He examined the card over 2 days. His written report, when it arrived, was 4 pages long and stated its conclusion in the first paragraph. The ink chemistry and paper degradation were consistent with the date written on the card. There was no indication of backdating. The document was what it claimed to be. Patricia filed the report in her case binder. She made a note in the margin. The card predates the franchise documentation by 3 years and 4 months. Lily had been asking about the sauce. Not in any way that suggested she understood what was happening. She was 7, and her interest in the sauce was purely sensory. The interest of a child who had grown up eating it and found its recent absence from her life mildly irritating. She had told Marcus one evening at the kitchen table that the sauce at the diner now tasted like nothing. She had said it the way children say things that are true, plainly, without softening it, without knowing that the plainness was the point. Marcus had not responded. He had put more pasta in her bowl and asked about her day. He did not know that Patricia Osei had scheduled a meeting with the franchise partner's legal representative for the following Thursday, and that she intended to bring the index card, Howard Gill's report, Darnell's notebooks, and a timeline that began 3 years and 4 months before the date on any document Victoria Hargrove's corporate team had ever produced. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Patricia did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She laid the documents on the table in chronological order and walked through them the way a person walks through a room they know well, without hesitation, without drama, pausing only where the evidence required attention. The franchise partner's attorney, a man named Gerald Cho who had been practicing commercial litigation for 20 years, asked 3 clarifying questions. Patricia answered each one with a document. Gerald Cho made notes. He did not ask a 4th question. At the end of the meeting, he said quietly that the timeline was going to be difficult for the corporate position to survive. The index card was photographed again for the formal record. It was placed in an archival sleeve. It was logged as Exhibit A. Marcus was making dinner when Darnell called to tell him what had happened. He listened without interrupting. He asked one question: whether Lily's photograph had been returned from the locker. Darnell said Rosa had kept it safe. Marcus said thank you. He went back to the stove. The card had said everything that needed to be said. The compliance audit had not been initiated because of Marcus Hale. That was the detail that made everything that followed feel, in retrospect, almost inevitable. The way certain structures collapse not because someone pulls the right thread, but because the weight of the thing finally exceeds what the foundation was ever actually built to hold. The audit had been triggered by a routine franchise renewal review, the kind that happens every 3 years and is, in the vast majority of cases, a formality. An external auditing firm called Meridian Compliance Group had been contracted by the Franchise Partners Association to review operational records across 12 locations as part of the renewal process. The auditors were not looking for anything specific. They were looking at everything, which is a different kind of looking, and considerably more dangerous to anyone who has been counting on specificity to protect them. Dale Pruitt had been the regional manager for the Caldwell Street cluster for 4 years. In that time, he had developed a system, not a formal system, nothing documented, nothing that could be pointed to, for managing the gap between what the supplier invoices said and what the supplier invoices should have said. It was not a large gap in any individual instance. That was the design of it. Small discrepancies distributed across multiple line items, across multiple billing cycles, across multiple locations. The kind of thing that looks in any single review like rounding error or minor variance. The kind of thing that only becomes visible when someone looks at all of it at once. The Meridian auditors looked at all of it at once. The pattern emerged on day 3 of the audit. An analyst named Simone Tran, 28 years old, methodical in the way that people are methodical when they are new enough to the work to still find the details interesting, noticed that 3 supplier invoices from the same vendor across 3 separate billing cycles contained identical line item descriptions but different unit prices, with no corresponding change in the vendor's published rate schedule. She flagged it. Her supervisor looked at it. Her supervisor flagged it to the lead auditor. The lead auditor pulled the full billing history for that vendor across all 12 locations. By day 5, the pattern was no longer a pattern. It was a record. 47 invoices across 18 months, all bearing Dale Pruitt's approval signature, all containing discrepancies that, taken individually, could plausibly be attributed to clerical error, and taken together could not be attributed to anything except intention. He did not know that Simone Tran had also, in the course of pulling the full billing history, encountered a cross-referenced expense report that linked one of the inflated invoices to the same billing period as Marcus Hale's termination. The incident report that Pruitt had submitted to justify Marcus's termination had cited a health and safety violation as its primary basis. The report referenced an inspection visit and described findings that, according to the report, had necessitated immediate corrective action. It was a professional-looking document, formatted correctly, signed in the right places, filed within the required time frame. It had been sufficient on its own to support a termination order. Victoria Hargrove had signed the order without reading the full file. The full file included the health inspector's own record of the visit. Patricia Osei had requested that record 3 weeks earlier through a public records process. It had arrived in her office on a Tuesday morning, 9 pages long, covering the inspection visit in full. The inspector's name was Raymond Caldera. He had been conducting food service inspections for 11 years. His record of the Caldwell Street visit was detailed and specific. He had found 2 minor temperature log gaps, both attributable to a staffing shortage on the morning in question, both resolved before he left the building. He had noted no storage protocol failures. He had issued no corrective action notices. He had, in his own words, recorded the visit as closed with no outstanding violations. Pruitt's incident report had described the same visit as producing findings that warranted immediate personnel action. The 2 documents described the same day, the same location, the same inspector, and 2 entirely different outcomes. Patricia laid them side by side in her case binder. She did not annotate them. The juxtaposition was its own annotation. The Meridian audit report was delivered to the Franchise Partners Association on a Thursday morning. It was 43 pages long. The executive summary was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph described the scope of the review. The second paragraph described the invoice discrepancies. The third paragraph noted that the discrepancies appeared to be systematic rather than incidental and recommended referral to the appropriate regulatory authority. Gerald Cho received the report at the same time as the franchise partners. He read the executive summary, then the full invoice analysis, then the section on cross-referenced expense records. He made a single notation in the margin of page 31 where Simone Tran's analysis connected the inflated invoice to the termination billing period. The notation said, "Motive established." Victoria Hargrove received the audit report on Friday. She had been in a site visit in another city and her assistant had flagged it as requiring immediate attention. She read it on a flight back, in the window seat, with the document on her laptop and the clouds outside the window and no one around her who could see her face change as she worked through the pages. He did not know, Pruitt did not know, that the invoice trail Simone Tran had followed would eventually lead not just to the financial discrepancy, but to the sequence of events that had preceded Marcus's termination. The inflated vendor billing had begun, the records showed, approximately 6 weeks before the incident report was filed, 6 weeks before the fabricated safety violation, 6 weeks before the termination order. The timeline was not proof of a single decision, but it was proof of a period, a window during which something had shifted in Pruitt's management of the Caldwell Street location, and during which Marcus Hale had been the primary variable. Darnell had said it plainly, in one of his early conversations with Patricia. Pruitt was afraid of him. Not personally, professionally. The kind of fear that comes from standing next to someone whose competence makes your own position feel contingent. Marcus had never done anything to provoke it. He had simply been present and capable and uninterested in performing deference, and for a certain kind of person, that combination is more threatening than any direct challenge. Patricia added the audit report to the case binder. It sat behind Howard Gill's forensic analysis and Darnell's notebooks and the index card in its archival sleeve. The binder was, by this point, substantial. She did not consider it complete, but she considered it sufficient. Marcus did not know the audit report existed. He was at the catering job on Thursday, working a corporate lunch for a technology firm, plating the kind of food that is designed to be adequate rather than memorable. He worked cleanly and without complaint. His colleague on the line that day, a young cook named Theo, who had been watching Marcus work for 3 weeks with the focused attention of someone who is learning something without being taught, asked him, during a quiet moment between courses, how he always knew exactly when to pull something off the heat. Marcus thought about it for a moment. He said you learn to read the sound of it. Theo nodded and went back to his station. Lily had drawn a picture that week of the family at the kitchen table. Marcus, herself, and Mr. Buttons seated in his usual spot on the counter. She had written their names underneath in careful block letters. Under Mr. Buttons, she had written his name and then, in smaller letters, also family. Marcus had put it on the refrigerator with a magnet. Victoria Hargrove landed at the airport on Friday evening. Her car was waiting. She did not speak during the drive. Her assistant, sitting in the front seat, had learned over 2 years of working for her to distinguish between the silences that were processing and the silences that were something else. This was something else. She had signed the termination order without reading the full file. She had stood in a diner and made a remark about a child's toy. She had held a press conference and used the word standardized 4 times. And she had done all of it, the audit report now made clear, on the basis of a document that had been constructed to produce exactly those results. She had not been the authority in Marcus Hale's termination. She had been the instrument. The car moved through the city in the dark. She looked out the window and said nothing. Number 5. The franchise collapse and the viral camera footage. Marcus Hale had not installed the camera above the service counter at Merritt's Diner. The previous manager had done that years before Marcus ever tied on an apron there, and the device was so small and so unremarkable that most of the staff had forgotten it existed. It recorded continuously. It stored footage on a rolling 30-day loop. And on the morning that Victoria Crane had walked into that diner and dismissed Marcus Hale in front of a dining room full of customers, every word of it had been captured in a single unbroken file. He did not know that the footage would matter. He had not thought about it at all. A line cook named Darnell Reeves had thought about it. Darnell had worked beside Marcus for 2 years, had watched the termination happen from behind the pass-through window, and had quietly pulled the file from the system before the loop could overwrite it. He had not told anyone. He had saved it to a personal drive and kept it in the breast pocket of his jacket, the way a person keeps something they are not yet sure how to use but are certain they should not lose. That was in September. The drive stayed in Darnell's pocket through October, through the audit, through the weeks when the story was still internal and quiet and contained. In November, the story stopped being quiet. The investigative piece that ran in a regional business journal on a Tuesday morning was careful and sourced and, by the standards of business journalism, restrained. It named Victoria Crane. It named the invoice discrepancy. It named the terminated employee whose performance metrics had been used as a pretext. It did not use the word fraud in the headline. It did not need to. The people who read it understood what they were reading, and by noon that day it had been shared widely enough that a national outlet picked up the thread. By Wednesday, 3 franchise partners had issued statements. The statements were not identical, but they carried the same essential weight. Each one noted that the franchise agreement contained a clause. Standard language, the kind of language that sits in contracts for years without anyone expecting to invoke it, requiring the franchisor to maintain ethical operating standards as a condition of continued partnership. Each one noted that the current circumstances had raised questions about whether that condition was being met. Each one announced a temporary suspension of new investment pending review. Temporary, in this context, meant permanent. Anyone who had watched a franchise structure under pressure knew that. The fourth partner did not issue a statement. The fourth partner's attorneys sent a letter directly to Crane Group's legal team, and the contents of that letter were not made public. But the effect of it was visible within 48 hours when the fourth partner's signage came down from 2 locations in the southwest. That was Thursday. Darnell Reeves watched all of this from a bar stool in his apartment and made a decision. He uploaded the footage on Friday morning. He did not add music. He did not add text overlays or commentary. He trimmed it to 4 minutes and 11 seconds, which was the duration of Victoria Crane's visit to the diner from the moment she entered to the moment she left, and he posted it without a caption beyond the date and the location. The camera had caught everything. It had caught Victoria's entrance, the way she moved through the room with the specific unhurried authority of someone who expects the space to rearrange itself around her. It had caught her standing at the counter, looking at the laminated menu with an expression that required no translation. It had caught her voice, clear and carrying, as she told Marcus that the diner had become an embarrassment. It had caught the moment she noticed Lily. Lily had been sitting in the corner booth that morning, the way she sometimes did on days when school started late, with a glass of orange juice and a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Buttons propped against the napkin dispenser. She was 6 years old. She had her father's careful stillness. She had been watching the room the way children watch rooms when they sense that something important is happening and have not yet decided whether to be frightened. The camera had caught Victoria Crane glancing at the child, at the worn rabbit, at the booth with its cracked vinyl and its sticky laminate surface, and it had caught the small dismissive sound she made. Not a word, just a sound. The kind of sound that does not require translation either. And then it had caught Marcus, standing behind the counter, not responding, not defending himself, not raising his voice or his chin or his hands, just standing there with the particular stillness of a man who has decided a long time ago that some things are beneath the dignity of a response. That image, Marcus still, Lily watching from the corner booth with Mr. Buttons in her lap, became the thumbnail. Not by design, by the logic of the thing itself. It was the frame that captured what the footage meant. And the internet, which is often wrong about many things, was not wrong about that. By Saturday, the clip had been viewed 11 million times. By Sunday, the number was larger and had stopped being a useful measurement. The franchise partners who had issued statements on Wednesday were now fielding calls from their own investors. The 2 partners who had not yet moved issued statements of their own. The language in these was less careful than the language in the earlier ones. One of them used the word exploitation. The word appeared once, in the 3rd paragraph, and it was not retracted. The Crane Group's communications team released a response on Sunday afternoon. It was 4 paragraphs long and contained the phrases "deeply committed to our partners, and we take all concerns seriously, and we are conducting a thorough internal review." It did not mention Marcus Hale. It did not mention Lily. It did not mention the footage. The absence of those names was itself a kind of statement, and it was read as one. Victoria Crane called Marcus Hale on Monday morning at 7:42. He was in the garage. He had been there since 6, working on a project that had nothing to do with any of this. A set of cabinet doors he had agreed to restore for a neighbor. Simple work, the kind of work that asks only for attention and patience. He looked at the phone when it rang. He recognized the number from the paperwork he had received in September. He set down the scraper he had been using and answered. She spoke for a long time. He listened. Her voice, which had been in September the voice of someone accustomed to the room arranging itself, had changed register in a way that was difficult to name precisely, but unmistakable to hear. It was not broken. It was not theatrical. It was something quieter and, in its quietness, more significant. The voice of a person who has arrived, without planning to, at the outer edge of what their certainty can carry. She said that the situation had become something she had not anticipated. She said that the coverage had been unfair in certain respects, though she did not specify which respects. She said that she had been reviewing the circumstances of his termination and that she believed there was a conversation to be had about what had happened and about what might be possible going forward. She said the word opportunity. She said the word partnership. She said that she thought a man with his background and his profile, given everything that had come to light, might be exactly the kind of story that the Crane Group needed to be telling right now. She stopped. There was a pause that lasted several seconds. Marcus said that he appreciated the call. That was all he said. He did not elaborate. He did not accept. He did not refuse with any particular emphasis. He said that he appreciated the call, and then the call ended, and he picked up the scraper and went back to the cabinet doors. The garage light was still on. He drove home just after 8 that evening. The streets were quiet the way streets are quiet in small cities on weekday nights. Not empty, but unhurried. The traffic thinned to the occasional pair of headlights moving at the speed of people who have somewhere to be but no urgency about arriving. The house was dark except for the window above the kitchen sink, which Lily always left on because she did not like the idea of her father coming home to a completely dark house. She had started doing that on her own, without being asked, sometime in the spring after Claire died. She had never explained it and Marcus had never asked her to. He parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, not thinking about Victoria Crane, not thinking about the footage or the franchise partners or the word exploitation in the third paragraph of a statement he had not written and had not asked anyone to write. He was thinking about the cabinet doors, about a particular section of veneer near the lower left corner that had lifted slightly and would need a different approach tomorrow. He was thinking about whether Lily had eaten the dinner he had left in the refrigerator or whether she had made herself toast again, which was her solution to most problems. He went inside. She was asleep in her room, Mr. Buttons tucked under her arm at the specific angle that apparently constituted comfort, her breathing the slow and total breathing of a child who has no unfinished business with the day. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. There is something that the story of Marcus Hale makes plain. If you are willing to look at it carefully and without hurry, loud authority moves fast. It fills rooms, it signs documents, it makes sounds that carry. But it does not always know what it is looking at. Disciplined work is quieter than that. It accumulates without announcing itself. It leaves evidence in the grain of the wood, in the consistency of a sauce, in the stillness of a man who does not raise his voice because he has never needed to. Victoria Crane had looked at Marcus Hale and seen something dismissible. She had not been careless exactly. She had simply been looking at the wrong things. The garage light was still on when he fell asleep. It burned steadily in the dark, the way it always did when there was work left to finish in the morning. Unhurried, quiet, still.